Daniel Reed stood frozen at the edge of the infinity pool, equipment bag slipping from his shoulder as Ava Sterling emerged from the water, completely bare, vulnerable, and watching him with eyes that held both challenge and desperate hope. In that single moment, the 32-year-old single father faced a choice that would define not just his Wednesday morning, but the entire trajectory of two lives built on loneliness and longing. This wasn't seduction. This was a test of whether one man could see a billionaire's humanity without exploiting her need to be seen. What happened next changed everything they thought they knew about connection, restraint, and what it means to truly protect the people who matter most. Stay with me until the end of this story. Hit that like button and comment what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this journey travels. The Wednesday morning sun hit the Pacific Palisades with the kind of aggressive brightness that made everything look cleaner than it actually was. Daniel Reed's van rattled up the winding driveway at exactly 8:47 a.m., 13 minutes earlier than his scheduled arrival. He'd learned years ago that arriving early to service pools meant avoiding traffic, maximizing his day, and, most importantly, getting home to Maya before the after-school program charged late fees he couldn't afford. He killed the engine and sat for a moment, looking at the Sterling estate through a windshield that needed replacing. The mansion sprawled across the hillside like a monument to excess, all glass and steel and angles that suggested the architect had been paid by the corner. Daniel had been servicing this pool for 8 months now, and he still couldn't imagine what one person did with 12,000 square feet of living space. One person. That was the strange part. Ava Sterling lived alone in a house designed for entertaining crowds that never materialized. Daniel grabbed his equipment bag and walked the familiar path around the side of the house, past the meticulously maintained garden where he'd never once seen evidence of an actual gardener at work. Everything here operated on invisible schedules, maintained by invisible hands. That's what wealth bought. The illusion that beauty simply existed without effort. The pool area opened before him like a magazine spread. Infinity Edge, saltwater system, automated cleaning cycle that frankly made his weekly visits somewhat redundant. But wealthy people didn't hire pool technicians because they needed them. They hired them because the presence of service workers confirmed their status. Daniel had made peace with that reality years ago. He set down his bag and ran through his standard checklist. Test the chemical levels. Check the filtration system. Inspect the tile line for calcium buildup. Skim any debris that had accumulated since his last visit. The work was methodical, almost meditative. In a life defined by chaos, single fatherhood, inconsistent income, a daughter who asked questions he didn't have answers for, these Wednesday mornings offered predictable structure. "You're early again," the voice came from above. Daniel looked up to find Ava Sterling standing on the second-floor balcony, coffee cup in hand, wearing a white silk robe that probably cost more than his monthly rent. She wasn't smiling, but she wasn't frowning either. Her expression held that carefully neutral quality he'd come to recognize in wealthy clients, pleasant enough to avoid rudeness, distant enough to maintain hierarchy. "Traffic was light," Daniel called back. "I can come back later if you'd prefer." "No, it's fine." She took a sip of her coffee, still watching him. "You're always early. Do you do that with all your clients?" The question surprised him. In 8 months, their interactions had been limited to polite nods and the occasional discussion about pool maintenance. Ava Sterling didn't make small talk. She barely made eye contact. "When I can," Daniel said honestly. "Helps me stay on schedule for the rest of the day." "You have a lot of pools to clean?" 16 regular clients, more during summer. Ava nodded slowly, as if this information required serious consideration. "That's a lot of driving." "It's a living." The conversation died there, settling into the familiar silence that characterized their weekly encounters. Ava retreated into the house, and Daniel returned to his work. But something felt different this morning. That brief exchange had contained more words than they'd spoken in the previous 2 months combined. Daniel tested the water chemistry, noting that the pH had drifted slightly alkaline. He added the appropriate chemicals, watching them dissolve into the crystal-clear water. The pool's automation system could handle basic maintenance, but it couldn't make judgment calls about water balance. That required human expertise, the one thing money couldn't fully automate. "Do you have children?" Daniel turned to find Ava standing at the edge of the patio, now dressed in sleek black athletic wear that suggested expensive personal training sessions. Her dark hair was pulled back in a ponytail, and without makeup, she looked younger than the photographs that occasionally appeared in tech industry publications. "A daughter," Daniel said, straightening up from where he'd been crouched by the pool's edge. "Maya, she's 7. 7 is a good age." Ava's expression softened fractionally. "Still young enough to think their parents know everything. For about 6 more months, maybe." Daniel found himself almost smiling. "She's already started questioning my authority on dinosaurs. Apparently I got several facts wrong about velociraptors. Velociraptors are serious business. So I've learned." Ava moved closer, sitting on one of the pristine lounge chairs that Daniel had never seen anyone actually use. "Your wife doesn't mind you working Wednesdays? Most families do activities on—" She stopped, noticing something in Daniel's expression. "I'm sorry, that was presumptuous." "It's fine," Daniel said quietly. "There's no wife. It's just me and Maya." "I see." Ava looked out across the pool toward the view of Los Angeles spreading below them in hazy sprawl. "That must be difficult." "We manage." The silence that followed felt different from their usual lack of conversation. This silence held weight, the kind that emerges when two people recognize something in each other they hadn't expected to find. "I should let you work," Ava said finally, standing, but she didn't move toward the house. "Daniel, it is Daniel, right?" "Yes, ma'am." "Don't call me ma'am, it makes me feel like I'm 60. She paused. "My name is Ava." "I know." "Of course you do." A ghost of a smile crossed her face. "Everyone knows?" "That's the problem, actually. Everyone knows Ava Sterling, the company, the valuation, the Forbes profile. But no one really knows me." She caught herself, something like embarrassment flickering across her features. "I don't know why I said that. You're here to clean the pool, not provide therapy." Daniel chose his words carefully. Sometimes it's easier to talk to someone outside your regular world. No expectations. No judgment. Ava studied him with an intensity that made Daniel want to look away, but he held her gaze. Whatever was happening here, this shift from employer-employee distance toward something resembling actual conversation, required honesty, not deference. "You're not what I expected," Ava said softly. "Neither are you." She nodded slowly, then finally turned toward the house. "Enjoy the quiet this morning, Daniel. It's supposed to be a rare, clear day." Daniel watched her disappear through the massive sliding glass doors, then returned to his work. But the rhythm felt disrupted now, his thoughts circling around that brief interaction. There had been something in Ava's voice, a loneliness that money couldn't solve, a hunger for genuine connection that no amount of success could satisfy. He recognized it because he carried the same weight. The weeks that followed established a new pattern. Every Wednesday, Ava would appear, sometimes on the balcony, sometimes poolside, occasionally emerging from the house as if her timing were coincidental. Their conversations remained brief but gradually deepened, moving past superficial pleasantries into territory that felt almost confessional. Daniel learned that Ava had built her company from a single algorithm she'd developed in graduate school, turning it into a tech empire worth $3 billion before she turned 30. She'd been profiled in every major publication, invited to speak at conferences around the world, courted by venture capitalists and celebrities who wanted proximity to her success. "But none of them see me," Ava said one morning, sitting cross-legged on the pool deck while Daniel cleaned the filtration system. "They see the valuation, the potential acquisition price, the networking opportunity. I'm not a person to them. I'm a portfolio opportunity." "That sounds exhausting," Daniel said, not looking up from his work. "It is. Sometimes I think about selling everything and disappearing, buying a small house somewhere ordinary and just existing. No staff, no investors, no expectations." She laughed bitterly. "But I can't. Too many people depend on the company. Too much momentum to just walk away." Daniel understood that trap, being defined by responsibilities that left no room for personal desires. He told Ava about his own life. Working 2 jobs before Maya was born, the sudden departure of her mother when their daughter was 6 months old, the scramble to build stability from chaos. He described the constant calculation of hours versus income versus time with his child, the guilt that shadowed every choice. I missed her first steps, Daniel said one Wednesday, surprising himself with the admission. I was cleaning a pool in Santa Monica. The client called to complain about leaves I'd supposedly missed. Maya's babysitter sent me a video. Maya walking across the living room, laughing like it was the greatest adventure. And I was arguing about leaves. You were providing for her, Ava said gently. I know, but knowing doesn't make it hurt less. These conversations unfolded over weeks, accumulating like layers of paint that gradually created a complete picture. Daniel learned that Ava's parents had died in a car accident when she was 23, leaving her alone with her grief and her ambition. She'd poured everything into her company, using work as armor against loss. By the time she'd achieved the success her parents would have celebrated, there was no one left to share it with. I have a house full of rooms I never enter, Ava said one morning, her voice so quiet Daniel almost missed it. I have a chef who prepares meals I eat alone. I have a staff who maintain perfection I don't even notice. And every morning I wake up and think, this is it? This is what winning looks like? Daniel wanted to reach out, to offer some gesture of comfort. But the distance between them, employer and employee, billionaire and pool cleaner, felt impossible to cross. So he offered the only thing he could, honest response. My daughter asked me last week if we were poor, Daniel said. I told her no, we have everything we need. And she said, Then why do you always look worried? Kids see through everything, you know. All my careful budgeting, all my attempts to shield her from stress. She sees it all. What did you tell her? The truth? That sometimes adults worry about making sure their kids have good lives. That worry is just love in a different form. Daniel straightened up, finally meeting Ava's eyes. She hugged me and said she didn't need a bigger house or fancier toys. She just needed me to smile more. Smart kid. Smarter than her dad, that's for sure. Summer arrived, turning the morning sessions into exercises in heat management. Daniel shifted his schedule earlier, arriving at 7:30 a.m. to avoid the worst of the sun. Ava started appearing in workout clothes, clearly returning from morning runs or gym sessions. The athletic wear revealed what her usual designer clothes concealed. She was strong, fit, beautiful in ways that had nothing to do with wealth. Daniel tried not to notice, tried and failed. You're staring, Ava said one morning, catching him mid-glance. Sorry, I didn't mean... It's fine. She sat on the pool's edge, dangling her feet in the water. It's actually refreshing. Most people are either too intimidated to look or too calculating in how they look. You're just honest about it. Daniel didn't know how to respond to that, so he focused on checking the pool's automatic vacuum system. But he could feel Ava watching him now, studying him with the same directness he'd accidentally shown her. Can I ask you something personal? Ava said. You're the boss? Don't say that, not right now. She waited until he looked at her. Why pool cleaning? You're clearly intelligent. You could probably do a dozen other things. Daniel sat back on his heels, considering the question. Flexible hours. I'm my own boss, mostly. I can schedule around Maya's school, be there for pickup, make her dinner. Office jobs wanted 60-hour weeks and acted like asking to leave at 5 was a moral failing. This lets me be a father first, employee second. That's admirable. It's necessary. There's a difference. Ava nodded slowly. I think about that sometimes. What I'd sacrifice for someone I loved, what I'd give up. But I've never had to make that choice. My work is my life. There's nothing competing for my attention. She paused. That probably sounds pathetic to you. No, Daniel said quietly. It sounds lonely. The word hung between them, honest and exposing. Ava's expression flickered, surprise, recognition, something that might have been relief. It is, she admitted. God, it really is. They sat in silence for a long moment, the morning sun climbing higher, the distant sounds of Los Angeles waking up drifting across the hillside. Daniel knew he should return to work, maintain the professional distance that had kept their relationship safely undefined. But something was shifting between them, some barrier wearing thin. I should finish up, Daniel said, though he didn't move. I should let you, Ava replied, though she didn't stand. Neither of them moved. "This is dangerous," Ava said softly. "I know. We're from completely different worlds. I know that too. And yet," Ava turned to look at him fully, "these Wednesday mornings are the only time all week when I feel like a real person. Not a CEO, not a billionaire, just Ava. Someone who can have an actual conversation with someone who doesn't want anything from her." "I do want something from you," Daniel said honestly. "I want to keep talking like this. Keep having these mornings. Even though I know it's probably a terrible idea." "Probably?" "Definitely." Ava smiled, a genuine smile that transformed her entire face. "At least you're honest about it." The following Wednesday, Daniel arrived to find the estate eerily quiet. No gardeners, no housekeepers. Even the usual sounds of staff moving through the property were absent. He made his way to the pool area, wondering if he'd somehow gotten the schedule wrong. Ava was already there, sitting on the edge of the pool in a simple black swimsuit. No cover-up, no pretense. Just Ava, waiting. "I gave everyone the day off," she said as Daniel approached. "I wanted privacy." Daniel's heart rate kicked up. "Ava." "Nothing inappropriate. I promise." She stood, and Daniel could see the vulnerability in her posture, the courage it took to be this exposed. "I just wanted one morning where we didn't have to worry about who might see, who might report back. One morning where we could just exist." Daniel set down his equipment slowly. "This isn't a good idea." "Probably not." "I should leave." "You probably should." He didn't move. Neither did she. "I'm not going to pretend I don't feel this," Ava said quietly. "Whatever this is, this connection. I know all the reasons it's impossible, our different circumstances, the power dynamic, the fact that I'm technically your employer. I know all of it. But for once in my life, I want to be honest about what I feel instead of what I should feel." Daniel's hands clenched at his sides. "I have a daughter who depends on me making good decisions. I can't afford to complicate my life, no matter how much I might want to." "I know. Your integrity is one of the things Ava caught herself. "One of the things I admire about you." The air between them felt charged, heavy with possibility and restraint. Daniel could feel his resolve weakening, could feel the pull of this woman who seemed to understand his loneliness because she carried her own. "I should really go," Daniel said, but his voice lacked conviction. Ava took a step closer, then another. She was inches away now, close enough that Daniel could see the gold flecks in her brown eyes, could smell the subtle scent of her perfume. "I'm not asking for anything you can't give," Ava said softly. "I'm not asking you to risk your life or compromise your values. I'm just asking for honesty. For one morning where we stop pretending we don't feel this connection." Daniel's breath caught. Every rational part of his brain screamed at him to step back, to maintain distance, to protect his job and his daughter's stability. But another part, the part that had been lonely for so long he'd forgotten what human connection felt like, urged him forward. "Ava, She moved without warning, slipping out of the simple black swimsuit she'd been wearing. In seconds, she stood before him completely bare, vulnerable in a way that transcended mere physical nudity. This wasn't seduction. This was something far more profound, a test of whether he could see her humanity without exploiting it, whether he valued her dignity over his desire. Daniel froze. His first instinct was to look away, but he recognized that would be wrong too. A rejection of the trust she was offering. So he held her gaze, seeing not a billionaire's body, but a woman's desperate need to be truly seen without being consumed. "This isn't about sex," Ava said, her voice shaking slightly. "This is about trust, about whether you can see me, all of me, and still choose respect over opportunity." Daniel's entire body felt rigid with the effort of restraint. He wanted to reach for her, wanted to close the distance, wanted to take what was being offered and damn the consequences. But beneath that desire lived something stronger, his principles, forged through years of single fatherhood and hard-won integrity. "I see you," Daniel said quietly, his voice rough with emotion and restraint. "I see exactly who you are, Ava. And because I see you, because I respect you, I'm going to stay exactly where I am." Tears welled in Ava's eyes. She stood there for a long moment, naked and vulnerable, and Daniel witnessed something remarkable: relief. Not disappointment or rejection, but profound relief that someone had finally passed the test, had finally proven that she could be vulnerable without being exploited. Slowly, Ava reached for her swimsuit and slipped it back on. When she was covered again, she moved to the pool's edge and sat down, feet dangling in the water. Daniel joined her, maintaining a careful distance. "Thank you," Ava whispered. "For what?" "For being exactly who I hoped you were." They sat in silence for a while, the morning sun warming their shoulders. Something fundamental had shifted between them, not crossing into romance but deepening into something that might have been more valuable: true understanding. "This can't continue," Daniel said finally. "These mornings, this closeness. Someone will notice, someone will assume, and assumptions will destroy both our lives." "I know. Your reputation is already built on being untouchable. Let them think I'm having an affair with the pool man. At least that would make me seem human. But my daughter would be hurt by the rumors, by the speculation." Ava turned to look at him. "You're right. Of course you're right. We have to stop this before it becomes something we can't control." The words were rational, necessary, but they cut through Daniel like glass. "I don't want to stop seeing you," he admitted. "These Wednesdays they matter to me. You matter to me. You matter to me too." Ava's voice broke slightly. "More than you should. More than is safe." They sat together at the pool's edge, two people from impossibly different worlds, connected by loneliness and understanding and something that felt dangerously close to love. The sun climbed higher, the city below woke fully, and Daniel and Ava remained frozen in a moment that couldn't last but felt too precious to end. "What do we do?" Ava asked. Daniel looked out across the infinity pool toward the Los Angeles sprawl below. Somewhere in that vast city, Maya was in school, learning about fractions or history or whatever 7-year-olds studied. She depended on him to make wise choices, to prioritize her stability over his desires. Being her father meant sometimes choosing the harder path. "We protect what matters most," Daniel said. "For me, that's Maya. For you, that's your company, your reputation. We choose responsibility over desire. Even if it hurts? Especially if it hurts. That's how we know it matters." Ava nodded slowly, tears streaming down her face now. "You're a better man than I deserve to know. And you're stronger than you give yourself credit for." Daniel stood, offering his hand to help her up. "This doesn't have to be goodbye. It just has to be different, safer, more honest about what it can and can't be." Ava took his hand, letting him pull her to her feet. For just a moment, they stood close enough to embrace, close enough to cross every remaining line, but Daniel stepped back, maintaining the distance that honor required. "I should finish the pool maintenance," he said, his voice thick. "And I should get ready for a board meeting." Ava wiped her eyes, composing herself with visible effort. "Daniel?" "Yeah?" "Thank you for seeing me. Really seeing me. That gift is more valuable than you know." Daniel nodded, not trusting himself to speak. He returned to his work while Ava disappeared into the house, and for the first time in 8 months, the Wednesday morning routine felt like loss instead of structure. He tested chemical levels and cleaned filters and performed all his usual tasks with mechanical precision, his mind elsewhere. When he finished, he packed his equipment and walked back to his van. He didn't see Ava again that morning. Didn't expect to. Whatever had unfolded between them required space now, distance to process what they'd discovered and what they'd chosen to protect instead of pursue. Daniel drove down the winding hillside road, his hands tight on the steering wheel. He'd made the right choice. He knew that with certainty. But right choices didn't always feel good, and this one sat in his chest like a stone. His phone buzzed at the first red light, a text from an unknown number. "You have more strength than most people ever find. Thank you for showing me what integrity looks like." Daniel stared at the message for a long moment, then typed back carefully. "Thank you for trusting me with your vulnerability. That took more courage than I'll ever have. D." He sent the text and then deleted the number from his phone. Not to forget it. He'd never forget it, but to remove the temptation to reach out when loneliness hit hardest. The rest of Wednesday unfolded normally. Daniel serviced 3 more pools, picked up Maya from school, made her favorite dinner, spaghetti with butter and parmesan, because she insisted marinara sauce was too spicy. They did homework together, read 2 chapters of the book they'd been working through, and Maya fell asleep curled against his side on the couch. Daniel carried his daughter to bed, tucked her in carefully, and stood in her doorway watching her sleep. This was what mattered. This small person who trusted him completely, who believed he always made the right choices, who needed him to be strong enough to choose her well-being over his own desires. "I did the right thing," Daniel whispered into the darkness. "I know I did." But walking back to his own empty bedroom, facing another night of solitude, Daniel allowed himself one moment of honest grief for what could never be. The following Wednesday arrived with the weight of inevitability. Daniel's van climbed the familiar hillside road at 7:30 a.m., but everything felt different now. The sunshine seemed harsher, the mansion more imposing, the distance between his world and Ava's more insurmountable than ever. He'd debated not coming at all, had spent the previous week composing mental scripts about finding a replacement service, about needing to reduce his client load, about any excuse that didn't involve admitting the truth, that being near Ava Sterling had become both necessary and impossible. But professionalism won out. He had a contract, responsibilities, a reputation to maintain. So Daniel parked his van and walked the familiar path to the pool area, his chest tight with anticipation and dread. The pool deck was empty. No Ava on the balcony, no sign of her morning workout routine. Just silence and the gentle lapping of water against tile. Daniel released a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. Relief and disappointment warred in his chest as he set down his equipment and began his routine. Maybe Ava had reached the same conclusion he had, that distance was safer than proximity, that silence was wiser than conversation. He was testing the pH levels when he heard the sliding glass door open. "I almost didn't come out." Ava's voice was quiet, carefully controlled. Daniel turned to find her standing at the threshold, dressed in jeans and a simple gray sweater despite the summer heat. She looked tired, as if the past week had stolen sleep the same way it had stolen his. "I almost didn't come at all," Daniel admitted. "But you did." "I have a job to do." "Right. Of course." Ava stepped onto the deck, maintaining careful distance. "That's what this is. A job." The words hung between them, heavy with everything they weren't saying. Daniel wanted to cross the space between them, wanted to tell her that she was far more than a client, that last Wednesday had shaken something fundamental in his understanding of connection and restraint. But saying those things would only make the inevitable separation harder. "We need to talk about what happened," Ava said, settling into one of the lounge chairs with visible tension in her shoulders. "Do we?" "I think we have to." She looked at him directly, and Daniel saw the same struggle reflected in her eyes, the push and pull of desire and responsibility. "I crossed a line last week. I put you in an impossible position, and I'm sorry." "You tested whether I could be trusted," Daniel said quietly. "There's nothing to apologize for." "I tested whether you would take advantage of me when I was vulnerable. That's not fair to someone who's just trying to do his job." Daniel set down his testing kit and moved closer, though still maintaining proper distance. "You needed to know if I saw you as a person or as an opportunity. Given your world, given how many people want something from you, I understand why that mattered." Ava's eyes glistened. "Most people would have taken what I offered, or they would have been disgusted and left. But you just stayed, saw me, respected me. Do you have any idea how rare that is?" "I'm not most people." "No. You're really not." She wiped at her eyes quickly. "Which is why this is so hard, because you're exactly the kind of person I've been looking for my entire adult life, and you're also exactly the person I can't have." The honesty of her words cut through Daniel like a blade. He sank into the chair beside her, close enough to talk but far enough to maintain safety. "I keep thinking about Maya," Daniel said, "about what would happen if rumors started, if other clients heard speculation about inappropriate behavior. This industry runs on reputation and trust. One whisper about crossing boundaries with a client, especially a female billionaire client, and I'm done. Not just fired from this job, but unemployable. And then what happens to my daughter?" "I know. I've been running the same calculations. Ava stared out at the pool's glittering surface. If people found out I'd been spending private time with my pool technician, they'd assume the worst. My board would question my judgment. Investors would worry about stability. The media would turn it into a scandal about the lonely billionaire seducing the help. The help, Daniel repeated, not quite able to keep the bitterness from his voice. I don't see you that way. You know I don't. But everyone else would. That's the problem. They sat in silence, the morning sun climbing higher, the familiar sounds of Los Angeles filtering up from below. Daniel thought about all the conversations they'd shared over the past months, the gradual peeling away of defenses, the recognition of kindred loneliness. He thought about how Ava's face transformed when she smiled genuinely, how her intelligence sharpened her observations, how her vulnerability made her more beautiful than any magazine cover. And he thought about Maya, asking why he always looked worried, needing him to be the stable foundation of her world. So what do we do? Ava asked, echoing the question from the previous week. I finished servicing your pool, Daniel said carefully. You go back to running your empire. We acknowledge that something connected us, and we protect that connection by not pursuing it. That sounds incredibly mature and reasonable. It also sounds miserable. Yes, Ava agreed softly. It does. Daniel stood, needing movement to manage the emotions churning in his chest. I should get back to work. You're paying for pool maintenance, not therapy. What if I want both? The question stopped Daniel mid-step. He turned to find Ava standing as well, her expression determined despite the tears on her cheeks. What if I want to keep having these Wednesday morning conversations? Ava continued. What if we can figure out how to have a friendship that doesn't cross lines but also doesn't pretend we don't matter to each other? That's playing with fire. Maybe. But I've spent my entire adult life making safe choices, building walls, keeping everyone at arm's length. And I'm so tired, Daniel. I'm so tired of being alone in my success. Her voice cracked. You're the first person in years who's talked to me like I'm just a person, who listens without calculating what they can get from me. I can't just give that up without trying. Daniel wanted to say yes, wanted to agree that they could navigate this impossible situation, maintain connection without crossing into territory that would destroy them both. But he'd lived long enough to know that feelings didn't respect boundaries, that proximity bred intimacy, that what started as friendship could become something far more complicated. I don't think I'm strong enough, Daniel admitted. Last week proved that. When you were standing there, vulnerable and trusting me, I wanted to close the distance so badly I could barely breathe. I wanted to throw away every practical concern and just reach for you. But you didn't. But I wanted to. And wanting is dangerous. Ava crossed the space between them, stopping just outside arm's reach. What if wanting is also honest? What if acknowledging what we feel and choosing to respect it without acting on it is the most real thing either of us has done in years? Ava, I'm not asking for romance. I'm not asking you to risk your reputation or your relationship with your daughter. I'm asking if we can have honesty. If these Wednesday mornings can be a space where two lonely people talk without pretense or agenda. She met his eyes. Is that really so dangerous? Daniel considered the question seriously. On paper, it sounded reasonable. Two adults maintaining appropriate boundaries while acknowledging genuine connection. But paper didn't account for the way his heart rate increased when Ava smiled. Didn't factor in the nights he lay awake thinking about their conversations. Didn't measure the growing hunger for something his life couldn't accommodate. I think it might be, Daniel said quietly. But I also don't want to walk away from you. Then don't. Not completely. What are you proposing exactly? Ava took a breath, clearly working through thoughts she'd been developing all week. Wednesday mornings continue as they have been. You service the pool. We talk if we both feel comfortable doing so. But we establish clear boundaries. No physical contact, no private meetings outside this context, no communication between Wednesdays. That's basically what we've been doing. Except now we're honest about why the boundaries matter. We're not pretending there's nothing between us. We're acknowledging it exists and choosing to protect each other by not pursuing it. Daniel ran a hand through his hair, torn between logic and longing. And you think that will work? That we can just acknowledge feelings and then ignore them? I think trying is better than walking away without trying. I think we both deserve that much. The proposal made a certain kind of sense. Clear parameters, honest acknowledgement, mutual protection of what mattered most. It offered a middle path between complete severance and dangerous proximity. Okay, Daniel heard himself say. We try, but the moment either of us feels like the boundaries aren't working, we reassess, honestly. Ava extended her hand formally, as if sealing a business agreement. Deal? Daniel looked at her outstretched hand, recognizing both the professional gesture and the deeper meaning beneath it. Taking her hand meant committing to this impossible balance, to existing in the space between connection and restraint. He shook her hand, feeling the warmth of her skin, the firmness of her grip, the electric current of contact they were promising to limit. Deal, Daniel said. They released hands quickly, both stepping back to reestablish safe distance. The moment felt simultaneously like progress and surrender, like they'd solved something and doomed themselves all at once. Daniel returned to his work with renewed focus, checking the filtration system and cleaning the tile line with meticulous attention. Ava settled back into her lounge chair with a tablet, ostensibly reviewing work documents but occasionally glancing his way. Can I ask you something? Ava said after a while. Sure. Why pool cleaning? You've told me about the flexible hours and being there for Maya, but there has to be more to the story. Daniel sat back on his heels, considering how much to share. I was in finance before Maya was born. Investment banking, 80-hour weeks, constant pressure, ridiculous stress. I was good at it, making partner track, six-figure salary, the whole ambitious young professional trajectory. What happened? Maya's mother got pregnant. We weren't married, barely knew each other honestly. It was supposed to be casual, but then there was this tiny person depending on us. Daniel's voice roughened. She tried. For about 6 months, she really tried, but motherhood wasn't what she wanted. One day I came home and she was just gone. Left a note saying she couldn't do it anymore. God, Daniel. So there I was with a 6-month-old baby, a demanding career, and no backup plan. I tried to make it work. Nannies, daycare, begging for flexible arrangements, but investment banking doesn't do flexible. They wanted total commitment or nothing. He met Ava's eyes. I chose my daughter. You gave up a partnership track for her. I gave up a paycheck and a title. I gained being the person who sees her first steps, hears her first words, knows her favorite bedtime story. That's not sacrifice. That's just choosing what matters. Ava's expression held something Daniel couldn't quite name. Admiration mixed with longing, respect tinged with grief. She's lucky to have you. I'm lucky to have her. She's the reason I know what love actually means. They fell into comfortable silence, the kind that had become familiar over months of Wednesday mornings. Daniel finished his maintenance checklist and began packing his equipment, aware that their time was ending, that the fragile boundary they'd established required him to leave on schedule. Same time next week? Ava asked as Daniel shouldered his bag. Same time, Daniel confirmed. He walked back to his van without looking back, knowing that turning around would make leaving harder. But as he drove down the winding hillside road, Daniel felt something shift in his chest. Not relief exactly, but maybe acceptance. They'd named what existed between them and chosen to honor it through restraint rather than pursuit. That took its own kind of courage. The following Wednesday brought unexpected complications. Daniel arrived at his usual time to find 3 luxury cars in Ava's driveway and voices carrying from inside the house. Business meeting, clearly. He considered leaving and returning later, but his schedule was packed. He'd have to work while Ava entertained whatever important people required mansion meetings. Daniel set up his equipment quietly, trying to maintain invisibility. But within 10 minutes, the glass doors slid open and Ava emerged with 3 men in expensive suits, all carrying themselves with the aggressive confidence of people accustomed to being important. We can continue this discussion outside, Ava was saying, her voice carrying the crisp authority Daniel recognized from their early interactions. The fresh air might help us think more clearly. The men followed her onto the deck, and Daniel felt their gazes land on him with the casual dismissal wealthy people reserved for service workers. He was furniture to them, part of the landscape, beneath notice. As I was saying, one of the men continued, the acquisition offer represents a premium of nearly 40% over current valuation. Your shareholders would be thrilled. My shareholders aren't running this company. I am. Ava settled into her usual chair, and Daniel noticed how she positioned herself to keep him in her peripheral vision. And I'm not interested in selling, regardless of the premium. Ava, be reasonable. I am being reasonable, Marcus. I built this company to solve problems, not to flip for profit. The minute I sell to a larger tech conglomerate, the mission changes. Innovation becomes secondary to quarterly earnings. Another man jumped in, his tone patronizing in ways that made Daniel's hands clench. With all due respect, you're not thinking long-term here. The market is shifting. If you don't sell now while the valuation is high, then I'll build something sustainable instead of profitable, Ava cut him off coldly. I know that's a foreign concept for some of you, but it's my decision to make. The argument continued, the men pressing from different angles while Ava deflected with practiced ease. Daniel tried to focus on his work, but he couldn't help overhearing the casual disrespect in how they addressed her, the assumption that she needed their guidance, the barely concealed frustration that she wouldn't accept their wisdom. Maybe you need time to think about this, the third man suggested with oily smoothness. Why don't we table the discussion and reconvene next week? Give you time to consult with people who understand the bigger picture. Something flickered across Ava's face, anger barely contained. I understand the bigger picture perfectly. What I don't understand is why 3 board members think they can pressure me into a decision I've already made clear I won't reconsider. We're not pressuring, we're advising. You're overstepping. Ava stood, signaling the meeting's end. I appreciate your concern, but my answer is final. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have other matters that require my attention. The dismissal was absolute. The 3 men exchanged glances that combined frustration and calculation, clearly strategizing their next approach. They filed back into the house, and Daniel heard the sounds of their departure. Car doors closing, engines starting, gravel crunching under expensive tires. When silence returned, Ava remained standing at the deck's edge, her shoulders rigid with tension. Daniel waited, unsure whether to speak or maintain his invisibility. I'm sorry you had to witness that, Ava said finally, not turning around. I was just working. Didn't hear anything. Liar. But there was warmth in her voice. They do that regularly. Show up uninvited, apply pressure, act like my success is some accident that needs their correction. Daniel set down his pool skimmer. They seemed pretty convinced you needed their advice. They're convinced I'm a woman who got lucky and now needs men to preserve that luck. Ava turned, and Daniel saw exhaustion written across her features. Do you know how many times I've been told I'm being emotional when I make strategic decisions? How often my analysis gets questioned while my male counterpart's hunches get celebrated? Sounds frustrating. It's infuriating. I have 2 PhDs, built a billion-dollar company from scratch, and I still get treated like I'm playing dress-up in the big boy boardroom. She laughed bitterly. Sometimes I want to sell everything just to prove them wrong. Let them see how quickly their precious acquisition falls apart without my leadership. Daniel moved closer, still maintaining appropriate distance, but offering presence. But you won't sell because proving them wrong isn't as important as proving yourself right. Ava looked at him sharply. How do you know that? Because you're not driven by spite. You're driven by purpose. You said it yourself. You built this company to solve problems. That's not about ego or profit. That's about meaning. Something in Ava's expression softened. Sometimes I forget that someone actually listens when I talk. I always listen. The moment stretched between them, heavy with everything their agreement forbade them from pursuing. Daniel saw Ava's resolve waver, saw her take a half-step forward before catching herself. I should let you finish, Ava said quietly, retreating to safer distance. Probably wise. But neither of them moved. The morning sun painted everything in gold, and for just a moment Daniel allowed himself to imagine a different life, one where he could cross that distance, where offering comfort didn't threaten everything he'd built, where being exactly who they were to each other was simple instead of impossible. Daniel? Ava's voice was barely a whisper. Yeah? Thank you for being here, for listening, for making Wednesday mornings the only part of my week that feels real. You do the same for me. The admission hung in the air between them, honest and dangerous. They'd promised boundaries, promised to protect what mattered most. But standing here in the California sunshine, loneliness, calling to loneliness across an impossible divide, those promises felt increasingly fragile. Daniel forced himself to return to work, to pack his equipment, to walk back to his van with professional distance. But driving away that morning, watching Ava's mansion shrink in his rearview mirror, Daniel felt the foundations of their careful agreement begin to crack. The cracks widened over the following weeks, subtle at first but unmistakable to anyone paying attention, and people were starting to pay attention. Daniel noticed it first in small ways. Mrs. Chen from the house next door began appearing on her balcony during his Wednesday morning visits, coffee cup in hand, watching the Sterling estate with barely concealed curiosity. The gardening crew that serviced the neighboring properties started timing their work to coincide with his arrivals. Even the mail carrier seemed to linger longer than necessary near Ava's driveway. "You've got an audience," Ava mentioned one Wednesday, nodding toward Mrs. Chen's balcony where the elderly woman stood with binoculars she wasn't even trying to hide. "I noticed," Daniel said, keeping his voice low. "How long has this been going on?" "About 2 weeks. Ever since Margaret Chen saw us sitting by the pool talking." Ava's expression tightened. "She's friends with half the board members' wives. I guarantee they're already speculating." Daniel felt cold dread settle in his stomach. Maybe I should recommend another service. Tell you I'm too busy to continue and confirm their suspicions that something inappropriate happened? That makes it worse. Ava sat on her usual lounger, but the easy comfort of their previous conversations had evaporated. "We're trapped, Daniel. If you leave suddenly, they assume the worst. If you stay, they watch and wait for proof." "There's nothing to prove. We haven't done anything wrong." "You think that matters?" In their world, appearance is everything. The billionaire spending time with her pool man, that's all the story they need. The words stung, not because they were cruel, but because they were true. Daniel returned to testing the pool's chemical levels, aware of Mrs. Chen's binoculars tracking his every movement. The Wednesday morning sanctuary they'd built together was dissolving under outside scrutiny, their careful boundaries rendered meaningless by other people's assumptions. "I hate this," Ava said quietly. "I hate that we can't even have a conversation without it becoming fodder for gossip." "Welcome to my world. Try being a single father in the service industry. Every interaction with a female client is potential scandal." "Is that why you're always so careful? Why you maintain such rigid professional distance?" Daniel glanced up at her, then back to his testing kit. "I learned early that one accusation, true or false, could destroy everything. So yeah, I'm careful. I keep conversations brief, never enter houses unless absolutely necessary. Make sure there are always witnesses around." He laughed bitterly. "Except here, with you. I got careless because I forgot that safety comes from invisibility, not connection." Ava flinched. "I'm not a danger to you. You're the biggest danger I've ever faced. Not because of who you are, but because of how you make me feel. Every Wednesday I tell myself this is the last time I'll let my guard down. And every Wednesday I sit here talking to you like we're friends instead of employer and employee. We are friends." "That's the problem, Ava. Friends from different worlds create complications neither of us can afford." Mrs. Chen's presence on the balcony felt like a physical weight, transforming their conversation into performance art for a hostile audience. Daniel worked quickly, efficiently, abandoning the slow ritual that usually characterized his Wednesday visits. The sooner he finished, the sooner he could escape the fishbowl of surveillance. "You're rushing," Ava observed. "I'm being professional." "You're running away." Daniel straightened, meeting her eyes directly despite Mrs. Chen's watching binoculars. "Yes, I am. Because staying means giving them more ammunition. Every minute I spend here talking to you is another data point for their narrative, and I can't afford to be the villain in someone else's story." "What about being the hero in mine?" The question hit Daniel like a punch to the chest. He stared at Ava, seeing the loneliness and longing written plainly across her features, seeing the same need for connection that kept drawing him back despite every rational warning. "I can't be your hero," Daniel said roughly. "I can barely be my daughter's hero. I'm just a guy trying to keep his head above water, trying to make enough money to keep the lights on and food in the fridge. I don't have the luxury of romantic gestures or noble sacrifices. I have obligations and responsibilities, and a 7-year-old who needs her father to not be the subject of neighborhood gossip. I know that. I'm not asking you to be something you're not. Then what are you asking? Because these Wednesday mornings are killing me, Ava. Every week I drive away promising myself I won't come back. And every week I show up anyway because the thought of not seeing you is worse than the guilt of wanting something I can't have. Ava stood, moving closer but stopping before crossing into dangerous proximity. I'm asking if there's any way we can have this. Not the fantasy version where our different circumstances don't matter. The real version where two people who understand each other figure out how to stay in each other's lives without destroying everything else. I don't think that version exists. Then we invent it. Daniel wanted to believe her, wanted to think they could navigate the impossible terrain between them and emerge intact. But he'd lived long enough to know that some distances couldn't be bridged, that some connections required sacrifices neither party could afford. Mrs. Chen is still watching, Daniel said instead of answering. Let her watch. Let her report to her friends. Let them all make their assumptions. Ava's voice held defiance edged with desperation. I'm tired of living my life according to other people's expectations. That's easy to say when you have financial security, when scandal is inconvenient rather than catastrophic. Daniel began packing his equipment with sharp, angry movements. But for me? For my daughter? Reputation is everything. One whisper about inappropriate behavior and I lose clients, lose income, lose the stability Maya needs. I would never let that happen. You can't control it. That's what you're not understanding. The moment this becomes public speculation, the moment someone decides the billionaire is slumming with the help, you can't protect me from the fallout. The words came out harsher than Daniel intended, but the truth of them sat heavy between them. Ava's eyes glistened with tears. She blinked back quickly, her composure cracking just enough to reveal the hurt beneath. Is that how you see yourself? As the help? It's how everyone else sees me. It's how Mrs. Chen sees me. How your board members saw me when they were here last week. Daniel's voice softened despite his frustration. And it's fine. I know what I am and what I do. But you need to understand what being seen with me costs you professionally. What assumptions people make. I don't care about assumptions. You should. Your company, your reputation, your autonomy as a female CEO, all of it depends on being taken seriously. The minute they can reduce you to a lonely woman making poor decisions about men, you lose power. Ava sank back onto the lounger, the fight draining from her posture. So we're back to impossible, back to walking away. I think we have to be. The silence that followed felt final in ways their previous conversations hadn't. This wasn't philosophical discussion about boundaries and restraint. This was the concrete reality of their situation, watched, judged, unable to exist in each other's proximity without fueling exactly the kind of speculation that would damage them both. I'm going to finish my route, Daniel said quietly. Then I'm going to send you the contact information for another pool service. Tell them I recommended them, and they'll take good care of you. Daniel, please. This isn't punishment, Ava. It's protection. For both of us. He shouldered his equipment bag, not looking at her because looking would break his resolve. You deserve someone who can be present in your life without hiding, and I deserve to make decisions based on my daughter's needs rather than my own wants. What if I need you? The question stopped Daniel mid-step. He turned to find Ava standing now, her arms wrapped around herself as if holding together something fragile. You don't need me, Daniel said gently. You need connection, understanding, someone who sees past the money and status to the person underneath. But I'm not the only person who can offer that, and I'm definitely not the right person to offer it given our circumstances. You're wrong. You're exactly the right person. That's why this hurts. Daniel closed his eyes, fighting the urge to drop everything and close the distance between them. Ava, I can't. I know you can't. Her voice cracked. I'm not asking you to. I'm just asking you to acknowledge that what we found in these Wednesday mornings was real, that it mattered, that I mattered to you the way you mattered to me. You know you did. You know you do. Then don't disappear completely. Don't make this the last conversation we ever have. Ava wiped her eyes quickly. I'm not asking for weekly visits or long conversations. Just don't erase me from your life like I was a mistake. Daniel considered the request, weighing it against every practical concern that demanded clean separation. But standing here looking at Ava's tear-streaked face, remembering every conversation that had made him feel less alone in the world, complete erasure felt wrong in ways he couldn't articulate. One text, Daniel heard himself say. Once a month, just to check in. Nothing romantic, nothing inappropriate, just two people who understand each other staying connected from a safe distance. One text a month, Ava repeated, something like hope flickering across her expression. That's it. That's all I can offer without risking everything else. Then I'll take it. They stood looking at each other across the pool deck, Mrs. Chen's binoculars capturing every moment, both knowing this was goodbye to their Wednesday morning ritual, even if it wasn't goodbye forever. Daniel committed Ava's features to memory, the way sunlight caught the gold in her eyes, the strength in her posture despite evident grief, the quiet dignity that had first drawn him to her. Thank you, Ava said softly, for seeing me, for all of this. Thank you for making me remember what connection feels like. Daniel turned and walked away before his resolve could crumble completely. He heard Ava's soft sob behind him, but didn't look back, knowing that turning around would undo everything his logic insisted was necessary. He loaded his equipment into the van with mechanical precision, started the engine, and drove down the winding hillside road one last time. In his rearview mirror, he saw Ava still standing by the pool, a solitary figure in a mansion built for crowds. Then the road curved and she disappeared from view, and Daniel focused on the practical tasks ahead, servicing 3 more pools, picking up Maya from school, making dinner, helping with homework, the ordinary responsibilities that defined his life and gave it meaning beyond fleeting connections with people from impossible worlds. His phone buzzed at the first red light, a text from Ava's number. Thank you for being exactly who you are. That gift matters more than you know. Daniel stared at the message, his throat tight. He saved the number under a simple initial, A, then typed back carefully. You're stronger than you think. Don't let them make you small. He sent it, then put the phone away and drove toward the rest of his Wednesday route. The morning felt broken somehow, the routine disrupted by loss. But Daniel had built a life on managing loss, on choosing responsibility over desire, on being the parent his daughter needed rather than the person he sometimes wanted to be. This was just one more sacrifice added to the collection. The following Wednesday, Daniel woke early out of habit before remembering he didn't have the Sterling estate on his schedule anymore. He'd sent Ava the referral to another service, received her brief acknowledgement, and watched that chapter close with the finality of a door swinging shut. He used the extra time to take Maya to school himself instead of the usual before care program. She chattered about her upcoming science project, about playground drama he only partially understood, about whether they could get a dog, even though he'd explained a dozen times that their apartment didn't allow pets. Dad, you seem sad, Maya said as they pulled into the school parking lot. Daniel looked at his daughter in the rearview mirror, struck by her perception. Just tired, sweetheart. You're always tired, but this is different. She unbuckled her seatbelt and leaned forward. Did something bad happen? No, nothing bad, just changes in my work schedule. Changes are hard, Maya said with the seriousness only 7-year-olds could muster. My teacher says changes are how we grow, but I think they're just how we get sad about things being different. Daniel felt his chest constrict. When did you get so wise? I was born wise. You just didn't notice because you were busy worrying. She kissed his cheek. Try to smile more today, okay? You look better when you smile. She bounded out of the car and into the school building, and Daniel sat in the parking lot for a long moment afterward, his daughter's words echoing in his mind. Try to smile more. Such a simple request that felt impossibly complex given the hollow space Ava's absence had created. The rest of the week passed in familiar patterns. Daniel serviced pools, managed scheduling conflicts, handled client requests that ranged from reasonable to ridiculous. He picked up Maya from school, made dinners, supervised homework, read bedtime stories. The rhythms of single parenthood flowed around him, demanding and exhausting and necessary. But Wednesday mornings felt empty now. The time slot that had been reserved for Ava's estate sat vacant on his schedule, a reminder of what he'd chosen to protect by walking away. 3 weeks after his last visit to the Sterling estate, Daniel's phone buzzed with a text from the single initial he'd saved. Monthly check-in. How are you doing? Daniel stared at the message, emotions warring in his chest. Relief that Ava had reached out. Regret that their connection had been reduced to monthly text exchanges. Fear that even this limited contact might not be sustainable. He typed back carefully. Busy. Maya's doing well. How's the company? The response came quickly. Still fighting acquisition pressure. Still refusing to sell. Some things don't change? Good. Don't let them bully you into giving up what matters. Same advice applies to you. Don't give up on connections that matter because they're complicated. Daniel read the message 3 times, parsing the layers beneath Ava's words. She wasn't just talking about their specific situation. She was challenging his entire approach to life. The careful boundaries, the protective distance, the constant prioritization of safety over risk. Some complications aren't worth the cost, Daniel typed back, especially when other people depend on your stability. And some connections are worth fighting for, even when fighting looks like strategic restraint. The conversation continued in fragments over the next hour, both of them clearly working while texting, messages arriving with gaps that suggested meetings and phone calls and all the demands of their separate lives. But the thread persisted, maintained, a lifeline between worlds that had no business touching. I miss our Wednesday conversations, Ava admitted finally. Me too, Daniel replied honestly, but missing something doesn't make pursuing it wise. No, but it makes it real, and real matters. Daniel didn't respond to that message, letting the conversation end there, because he didn't trust himself to continue. Real did matter, but so did practical. So did sustainable. So did protecting the people who couldn't protect themselves. He picked up Maya from school that afternoon and took her to their favorite taco truck for dinner, a Wednesday tradition that had outlasted the Sterling estate visits. They ate on a bench in the park, watching other families play, and Daniel tried to focus on the gift in front of him rather than the absence that haunted his thoughts. Dad? Maya said through a mouthful of carnitas. Do you have friends? The question surprised him. Sure, why? I never see you with them. You're always with me or at work. She swallowed. I worry that you're lonely. Daniel set down his taco, struck by his daughter's insight. I'm not lonely. I have you. That's different. I'm your kid. Kids aren't the same as friends. Maya looked at him seriously. My teacher says adults need other adults to talk to. Otherwise they get sad and don't even know why. Your teacher says a lot of things. Because she's smart, and she's right about this. Maya reached over and patted his hand. You should find a friend, Dad. Someone who makes you smile the way you used to. Daniel felt tears prick his eyes. His 7-year-old daughter, worried about his emotional well-being, encouraging him to find connection. The irony cut deep. He'd walked away from exactly that kind of friendship to protect her stability, and here she was telling him he needed it. I'll think about it, Daniel said quietly. Promise? Promise. They finished their tacos and drove home, and Daniel spent the evening helping Maya with her science project, while part of his mind circled the same question again and again. What if Ava was right? What if strategic restraint was just another form of giving up? What if the real wisdom wasn't in walking away, but in figuring out how to stay connected despite the obstacles? That night, after Maya was asleep, Daniel pulled out his phone and stared at Ava's last message. Real matters. 3 simple words that challenged everything he'd convinced himself was true about boundaries and protection and practical choices. He typed a response before he could overthink it. What if we tried something different? The reply came almost immediately, as if Ava had been waiting. I'm listening. What if we had coffee? Once a month. Public place, daytime, completely appropriate. Just 2 friends maintaining a connection. The typing indicator appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Daniel's heart hammered as he waited for Ava's response. That sounds wonderful. And terrifying. Terrifying means it matters, Daniel typed, throwing Ava's logic back at her. Then let's be terrified together. When and where? They made plans for the following Sunday at a coffee shop halfway between their neighborhoods. neutral territory that belonged to neither of their usual worlds. Daniel felt equal parts relief and dread as he confirmed the details, knowing he was stepping back into exactly the kind of complication he'd sworn to avoid. But Maya's words echoed in his mind. You should find a friend who makes you smile the way you used to. Maybe his daughter understood something his fear had obscured, that connection was worth the risk, that isolation masquerading as protection was its own kind of harm, that some relationships deserved fighting for even when the fight looked like showing up for coffee once a month. Daniel fell asleep that night with his phone on the nightstand, Ava's last message glowing in the darkness. Thank you for not giving up on us. Whatever we are, it's worth this. Whatever they were. Daniel didn't have words for it yet. Not romance, not quite friendship, something that existed in the space between professional distance and intimate connection. Something that required constant navigation but felt essential in ways he was only beginning to understand. Something real that mattered. Sunday arrived with a kind of nervous anticipation Daniel hadn't felt since his first date in high school. He changed clothes 3 times before settling on jeans and a button-down shirt, casual enough to be appropriate for coffee, but nice enough to show he'd made an effort. Maya watched his wardrobe crisis with barely concealed amusement. You're meeting a friend, not the president, she said from her position on his bed, surrounded by coloring books she'd been ignoring in favor of critiquing his outfit choices. I know, I'm just trying to look presentable. You look nervous. Are you nervous about your friend? Daniel caught his daughter's eye in the mirror. Maybe a little. Why? Friends aren't scary. Some friendships are complicated. Maya considered this with the seriousness she applied to all adult confessions. Is your friend nice? Very nice. Then it's not complicated. You just go have coffee and talk about stuff. She returned to her coloring with the matter settled in her 7-year-old mind. Daniel wished it were that simple. He kissed Maya goodbye. She was spending the afternoon with her best friend's family and drove to the coffee shop with his stomach in knots. He arrived 15 minutes early and spent the time sitting in his van trying to convince himself this wasn't a terrible idea. They were just 2 adults having coffee, friends maintaining a connection in a perfectly appropriate public setting. Nothing scandalous, nothing to hide, nothing that should generate the anxiety currently flooding his system. Daniel walked into the coffee shop at exactly 2 p.m. and found Ava already there, sitting at a corner table with 2 cups in front of her. She wore jeans and a simple cream sweater, her hair down around her shoulders instead of the sleek ponytail he was used to seeing. She looked younger like this, more approachable, less like the billionaire from magazine covers, and more like the woman who'd sat by her pool, confessing loneliness. I ordered for you, Ava said as Daniel approached. Black coffee, no sugar. I hope that's still right. That's perfect. How did you remember? I remember everything about our Wednesday mornings. She gestured to the seat across from her. Sit, please, before I lose my nerve and run out of here. Daniel sat, wrapping his hands around the warm cup. You're nervous too? Terrified. I keep thinking someone will recognize me, take a photo, and by tomorrow the tech blogs will be speculating about who I'm dating. She laughed shakily. Which is ridiculous because we're just having coffee. Just coffee, Daniel agreed. But the words felt hollow, given the electricity crackling between them, even in this crowded public space. They sat in awkward silence for a moment, both apparently forgetting how to have the conversations that had flowed so easily by the pool. The change of setting had disrupted something, transformed their natural rapport into stilted uncertainty. This is weird, right? Ava said finally. This feels weird. Incredibly weird. We talked for hours at the pool. Why can't we talk now? Daniel considered the question. Because at the pool, we had defined roles. You were the client, I was the pool technician. There were boundaries built into the situation. But here, he gestured around the coffee shop. Here we're just 2 people, and that's somehow more complicated. So what do? We pretend we're back at the pool. You ask me something about my week, I answer honestly, and we stop overthinking this. Ava smiled, a genuine smile that eased some of the tension. Okay, how was your week? Exhausting. I picked up 2 new clients, which is great for income but brutal for scheduling. Maya's science project is due Friday and involves building a model of the solar system, which means I spent last night covered in paint and papier-mâché. And I ate microwave dinners 4 nights in a row because I was too tired to cook actual food. That sounds overwhelming. It's life. Your turn. How was your week? Ava took a sip of her coffee, her expression thoughtful. The board is still pushing the acquisition. They brought in outside consultants to make their case, presented detailed financial projections showing how selling would benefit everyone. They made it sound so reasonable, so logical, like I'm being stubborn and emotional by refusing. Are you being emotional? Probably, but that doesn't make me wrong. She met Daniel's eyes. I built this company to matter, not just to make money. The minute I sell to a larger corporation, it becomes about quarterly earnings and shareholder value. The mission gets diluted, and I'm not ready to watch that happen. Then don't sell. You make it sound simple. It is simple. Hard, but simple. You know what you want. Don't let other people convince you to want something different just because it's easier for them. Ava's expression softened. That's exactly what I needed to hear. Everyone else in my life tells me to be strategic, to consider the big picture, to think long term. But sometimes the big picture is just holding on to the things that matter. Like Wednesday morning conversations, Daniel said before he could stop himself. Exactly like that. They fell into easier rhythm after that, the awkwardness dissolving as they rediscovered the connection that had drawn them together in the first place. Daniel told Ava about Maya's latest observations about adult stress, about the regular client who kept trying to give him financial advice he didn't need, about the small victories that punctuated his ordinary life. Ava shared stories about her company's latest projects, about the loneliness of success, about the constant navigation between who she was and who people expected her to be. An hour passed, then another. The coffee shop filled and emptied around them, the Sunday afternoon crowd flowing in waves while Daniel and Ava remained anchored at their corner table. It felt like the pool deck had been transported to neutral ground, the same honest exchange, the same recognition of shared understanding, the same sense that these conversations filled spaces both of them had learned to live with, empty. I've been thinking about what you said, Ava mentioned during a lull in conversation, about restraint being a form of love. Daniel's pulse quickened. That was weeks ago. I know, but it stuck with me. She traced the rim of her coffee cup. You chose not to pursue what you wanted because doing so would have hurt your daughter. That's love manifesting as protection, as sacrifice. It's just being a parent. No. Plenty of parents choose their own desires over their children's needs. You didn't. You don't. Ava looked at him directly. I've spent my whole adult life building walls to protect myself from being used or hurt. But watching you choose restraint, choose to walk away from connection because it was the responsible thing to do, that taught me something about what strength actually looks like. Daniel didn't know how to respond to that. He'd never thought of his choices as particularly strong or admirable. They were just what needed to be done, the calculations any single parent made 100 times a day. You give yourself too much credit for my decision-making, Daniel said finally. And you don't give yourself enough credit for teaching me what integrity looks like in practice instead of theory. The words settled between them, heavy with meaning. Daniel realized they were treading into dangerous territory again, acknowledging feelings that their friendship couldn't accommodate without transforming into something neither of them could afford. We should probably talk about boundaries, Daniel said quietly. I was thinking the same thing. These monthly coffee meetings, they're good. Really good. But we need to be clear about what they are and what they aren't. Ava nodded. No physical contact beyond standard greetings, no meetings beyond our scheduled times, no late-night texts or phone calls when we're feeling lonely. Public settings only, nothing that could be misconstrued as romantic. And honest check-ins if either of us feels like the boundaries aren't working. Ava paused. Does that cover it? I think so, except... Daniel hesitated. What do we tell people if they ask? About why we're meeting? The truth. That we became friends through a professional connection and we meet occasionally to stay in touch. Ava smiled slightly. It's not scandalous. Plenty of people maintain friendships across professional boundaries. Plenty of people aren't billionaire CEOs and pool cleaners. Then plenty of people are missing out on friendships that matter. Ava reached across the table, stopping just short of touching Daniel's hand. I know this is complicated. I know all the reasons why it probably shouldn't work, but I need this connection, Daniel. I need someone in my life who sees me as a person instead of a portfolio opportunity. I need it too, Daniel admitted. I spent so long convincing myself that isolation was strength, that not needing anyone made me independent. But Maya's been watching me, and she sees what I couldn't, that I've been lonely, really lonely. And this friendship, complicated as it is, makes me feel less alone. They sat with that admission between them, both recognizing the risk they were taking by choosing connection over safety. The coffee shop buzzed with Sunday afternoon energy around them. Families sharing pastries, students studying for exams, couples lost in conversation. Normal people living normal lives, unaware that two people at a corner table were negotiating the terms of an impossible friendship. Same time next month? Ava asked as they gathered their things to leave. Same time, Daniel confirmed. They walked out of the coffee shop together, pausing on the sidewalk where their paths would diverge toward separate parking areas. The afternoon sun painted everything gold, and for just a moment, Daniel let himself imagine a different life where this goodbye could include an embrace, where parting didn't require such careful distance. Thank you for taking the risk, Ava said softly. Thank you for being worth it. They separated without touching, each heading to their respective vehicles. Daniel sat in his van for a long moment before starting the engine, watching Ava's sleek car pull out of the parking lot and disappear into Sunday traffic. His chest felt full in ways he couldn't articulate, gratitude and longing and hope all tangled together. He picked up Maya from her playdate and listened to her excited chatter about the afternoon's adventures. They made dinner together, real food instead of microwave meals, and Daniel found himself smiling more easily than he had in weeks. You had a good time with your friend, Maya observed as they set the table. I did. How did you know? You look lighter, like something heavy got put down. She arranged napkins with 7-year-old precision. I'm glad. You deserve friends who make you happy. Daniel pulled his daughter into a hug, overwhelmed by her wisdom and perception. When did you get so smart about feelings? I've always been smart. You just worry too much to notice. The weeks that followed established a new rhythm. Daniel returned to his regular schedule of pool maintenance, picked up additional clients to fill the gap the Sterling estate had left, maintained the ordinary routines of single parenthood. But once a month, Sunday afternoons were reserved for coffee with Ava, 2 hours carved out of their separate lives to maintain the connection that mattered to them both. They met at different coffee shops around Los Angeles, varying locations to avoid establishing patterns that might attract attention. Sometimes they talked about serious things, Ava's ongoing battle with her board, Daniel's worries about Maya's education, the loneliness that defined their different worlds. Other times they kept conversations deliberately light, discussing books they'd read, movies that had moved them, small observations about daily life. The boundaries they'd established held. No physical contact beyond brief hellos and goodbyes. No communication between scheduled meetings except for occasional logistical texts. No late-night vulnerability when defenses were low. They protected their friendship by containing it, by accepting that some connections only survive through careful limitation. But containing something didn't eliminate it. And as autumn arrived and their monthly meetings accumulated into established tradition, Daniel felt the careful boundaries beginning to strain. It started with small things. The way his heart rate increased when Ava's name appeared on his phone. The disappointment that settled in his chest during the weeks between meetings. The constant mental editing of his daily experiences through the lens of what he'd share with Ava next time they met. He was thinking about her too much, missing her too much, wanting more than their friendship could accommodate. You're distracted again, Maya said one evening while they worked on homework together. Daniel looked up from where he'd been staring at nothing. Sorry, sweetheart. What did you need? Help with math, but also... She set down her pencil. Are you okay? You seem sad lately. I'm fine. That's what adults say when they're not fine. Maya fixed him with a look far too perceptive for 7 years old. Is it about your friend? The one you have coffee with? Daniel felt his chest tighten. What makes you think that? Because you're happy after you see them, and then you get sad again between visits. That's what happens when you miss someone. She tilted her head. Do you love your friend? The question hit Daniel like a physical blow. He opened his mouth to deny it, to explain that it wasn't that simple, that love required more than just connection and understanding. But looking at his daughter's earnest face, he couldn't quite form the lie. It's complicated, Daniel said finally. Love isn't complicated, it's just scary. Maya returned to her math worksheet. That's what my teacher says. People make love complicated because they're afraid of getting hurt. Daniel stared at his daughter, stunned by her casual wisdom. She was right, of course. The boundaries he and Ava had constructed weren't just about protection or propriety. They were about fear, fear of wanting something impossible, fear of the pain that came from acknowledging feelings that couldn't be pursued. That night, after Maya was asleep, Daniel pulled out his phone and stared at the single initial saved in his contacts. Their next coffee meeting was 2 weeks away, but the urge to reach out felt overwhelming. He wanted to hear Ava's voice, wanted to share the conversation with Maya, wanted to ask if she felt the same careful boundaries straining under pressure they'd both been pretending didn't exist. But texting outside their scheduled time violated the rules they'd established. And rules existed for good reasons, to protect them both from exactly this kind of slippage. Daniel set down his phone without sending anything. He'd made a commitment to responsible choices, to prioritizing his daughter's stability over his own emotional needs. That commitment didn't disappear just because maintaining it had become harder. The following Sunday brought their monthly coffee meeting. Daniel arrived at the designated shop to find Ava already waiting, and the moment their eyes met across the crowded space, he knew something had shifted. She felt it too, this growing weight that their careful friendship couldn't quite contain. "Hi," Ava said as Daniel sat down. "Hi." They looked at each other for a long moment, and Daniel saw his own struggle reflected in Ava's expression. The boundaries were breaking down. The restraint was becoming unsustainable, and neither of them knew how to address it without destroying the friendship they'd fought so hard to preserve. "We need to talk," Ava said quietly. "I know. This isn't working anymore. Or maybe it's working too well. I'm not sure which." Daniel wrapped his hands around his coffee cup, needing something solid to anchor to. "I think about you all the time. Between meetings, during work, late at night when I should be sleeping, and I know that's breaking the rules we established. I do the same thing. I catch myself composing mental messages to you, wanting to share something funny or frustrating or meaningful. And then I remember we don't do that our friendship only exists in these 2-hour windows once a month. It's not enough anymore." "No, it's really not." The admission hung between them, honest and terrifying. They'd built something sustainable by limiting it, and now the limitations were suffocating the very connection they were meant to protect. "So what do we do?" Daniel asked. "Because I can't keep doing this, seeing you once a month and pretending that satisfies what I feel, but I also can't pursue more without risking everything else in my life." Ava's eyes glistened. "I don't have an answer. I've been thinking about it constantly, running scenarios, trying to find a path forward that doesn't require one of us to sacrifice everything. But I can't see it, Daniel. I can't see how we bridge the distance between our worlds without someone getting hurt." "Then maybe we need to stop trying." The words tasted like ash in Daniel's mouth, but he forced himself to say them, because continuing on their current path meant slow torture, wanting more while settling for less, maintaining connection while denying depth, acknowledging feelings while refusing to honor them. "You want to end this completely?" Ava's voice cracked. "I want to be honest about what this is doing to us. To me." Daniel met her eyes. "Every month I tell myself this is enough, that friendship is enough. But it's not, Ava, and pretending otherwise is making me miserable." "What are you saying? That you want more than friendship?" "I'm saying I'm falling in love with you, and that terrifies me because I have absolutely no idea what to do about it." The words hung in the air between them, irretrievable and transformative. Daniel watched emotions flicker across Ava's face. Shock, recognition, fear, and something that might have been relief. The coffee shop noise faded to background static as they sat frozen in the confession that changed everything. "You can't say that," Ava whispered finally. "Daniel, you can't just—" "I know, believe me,
I know. He ran a hand through his hair, frustration and vulnerability making his movements sharp. I've been trying not to feel it, trying to convince myself that what we have is enough, that friendship is safer than whatever this is becoming. But I'm tired of lying to myself. I'm falling in love with you too. Ava's admission came out barely audible, but it hit Daniel with the force of a shout. She was crying now, tears streaming down her face as years of careful control dissolved in the face of honest emotion. But that doesn't change anything, Ava continued, her voice breaking.
We're still from different worlds. Your daughter still needs stability. My company still requires my full focus. Loving each other doesn't solve the practical problems that make this impossible. I know that too. Then why did you tell me? Why make this harder than it already was? Daniel leaned forward, keeping his voice low despite the intensity of emotion surging through him. Because pretending was killing me. Because Maya asked if I loved you, and I couldn't lie to her. Because you deserve to know that someone sees you, all of you, and loves what they see. Ava covered her face with her hands, her shoulders shaking. Daniel wanted desperately to reach across the table, to offer physical comfort, but even now, especially now, the boundaries they'd established felt essential. Crossing them would either begin something they couldn't finish or end something they couldn't survive losing. What do we do now? Ava asked through her tears. I don't know. For the first time in this entire impossible situation, I genuinely don't know. They sat in silence while Ava composed herself, while Daniel tried to process the seismic shift their confessions had created. Around them, the coffee shop continued its Sunday afternoon rhythm, oblivious strangers living ordinary lives, unaware that two people at a corner table were dismantling everything they'd built to protect themselves. I should go, Ava said finally, standing abruptly. I need to think, process, figure out. She stopped, looking lost. I just need to not be here right now. Ava, wait. Please, don't make this harder. She grabbed her purse with shaking hands. I'll text you, or maybe I won't. I don't know what the right thing is anymore. She left before Daniel could respond, weaving through the crowded shop and disappearing onto the sidewalk. Daniel sat frozen at their table, staring at her abandoned coffee cup, feeling like he'd just destroyed the most valuable thing in his life by being honest about how much it mattered. He drove home in a daze, his mind replaying the conversation on an endless loop. Maya was waiting when he arrived, bouncing with questions about his afternoon that he couldn't begin to answer truthfully. Your friend made you sad this time, Maya observed with her usual devastating perception. It's complicated, sweetheart. You keep saying that, but I think you're just scared. She settled onto the couch beside him. My teacher says being scared doesn't mean you're doing the wrong thing. Sometimes it means you're doing something really important. Daniel pulled his daughter close, grateful for her presence, even as his heart ached with confusion and loss. Your teacher is very wise. I know. That's why I listened to her. Maya looked up at him seriously. Are you going to stop seeing your friend now? I might have to. Because you love them? Daniel closed his eyes. Yes. That seems backward. Shouldn't you see people more when you love them, not less? Usually, yes, but sometimes loving someone means making hard choices to protect them. Maya considered this with the gravity of childhood wisdom. Or sometimes loving someone means being brave enough to choose them even when it's scary. Daniel stared at his daughter, struck by the simple truth she'd articulated. He'd spent months, maybe his entire adult life, choosing safety over risk, protection over vulnerability, isolation over connection. He'd convinced himself that restraint was strength, that walls were wisdom, that love required sacrifice in the form of distance. But what if Maya was right? What if real courage wasn't in walking away, but in figuring out how to stay? The week that followed was torturous. Daniel threw himself into work with manic intensity, servicing pools with meticulous precision as if perfect pH levels could somehow balance the chaos in his heart. He picked up extra clients, extended his hours, filled every available moment with tasks that didn't require emotional processing. But the nights were brutal. After Maya fell asleep, Daniel would lie awake replaying every conversation with Ava, examining each moment from new angles, searching for solutions that remained frustratingly elusive. He wanted to text her, wanted to call, wanted to show up at her mansion and demand they figure this out together. But he'd promised to give her space. And keeping promises mattered, even when breaking them would have provided temporary relief. 8 days after their coffee shop confession, Daniel's phone rang at 10 p.m. Ava's name appeared on the screen, and his heart nearly stopped. "Hello? I can't stop thinking about you." Ava's voice was raw, exhausted. "I've tried everything, throwing myself into work, meeting with friends, even going on a date with someone my board thought was appropriate. And all I could think about was how wrong it felt because he wasn't you." "Ava, let me finish, please." She took a shaky breath. "You were right. Pretending is killing me too. I've spent my entire adult life building an empire, proving I could succeed on my own terms, showing the world that I didn't need anyone. And I was so proud of that independence. But independence started feeling like loneliness, and loneliness started feeling like punishment for success." Daniel sat up in bed, his entire focus narrowed to Ava's voice. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that loving you has taught me something crucial, that strength isn't the same as isolation, that choosing connection over safety doesn't make me weak, that maybe the most courageous thing I can do is admit I need someone." We've had this conversation before. Nothing about our circumstances has changed. But maybe our response to those circumstances can change. Ava's voice grew stronger, more certain. "I've been running scenarios for days, Daniel, looking at our situation from every possible angle, and I keep coming back to the same question. What are we actually protecting by staying apart? Your reputation, my daughter's stability, our separate lives." "Our separate lonely lives," Ava corrected. "Our careful, controlled, deeply unsatisfying lives. And yes, pursuing this relationship would be complicated and risky and probably generate gossip. But walking away from it is also complicated and risky and definitely generating misery." Daniel felt hope flare in his chest even as logic demanded caution. "So what's the solution? We just decide to be together and damn the consequences?" "No. We decide to be together and manage the consequences like the intelligent, resourceful adults we are." He heard rustling, as if Ava was pacing. "I've been thinking about this practically. I can't make you wealthy, but I can make sure you have financial security that doesn't depend on pool cleaning. I can connect you with opportunities that match your intelligence and work ethic. I can—" "Stop." Daniel's voice was firm. "I don't want your money, Ava. I don't want opportunities or connections or charity disguised as relationship building." "That's not what I'm offering." "Isn't it? The moment you start solving my financial problems, I become the pool man who got lucky, the guy who leveraged a connection with a billionaire into a better life, and that would poison everything real between us." Silence stretched between them, heavy with the complexity they couldn't quite navigate. Daniel heard Ava's breathing on the other end of the line and knew she was wrestling with the same impossible calculations. "Then what do you want?" Ava asked finally. "Because I'm trying to find a path forward, and you keep blocking every option." Oh, I want us to be equals. I want whatever we build together to be based on who we are, not what you have or what I need. I want Maya to see me with someone who respects me, not someone who rescues me. I do respect you, that's not in question. But offering financial solutions suggests I need saving, and I don't. I need a partner, not a benefactor." Ava was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was softer, thoughtful. "You're right. I'm approaching this the way I approach business problems, identifying obstacles and throwing resources at them. But this isn't business. No, it's messier and more important than any business deal. So help me understand. If money isn't the solution, what is?" Daniel lay back on his bed, staring at the ceiling while he articulated thoughts he'd been circling for days. "We start small. We're honest with people about who we are to each other. We introduce our lives gradually instead of trying to merge them immediately. We let Maya get to know you as a person before she understands the romantic connection. We give your board and investors time to see that this relationship doesn't affect your judgment or leadership. That's incredibly slow and patient and mature." "Yes. And it's the only way this works without destroying what we've built separately." Daniel paused. I'm not asking you to hide our relationship. I'm asking you to let it develop naturally instead of forcing it into an immediate grand gesture. What if we don't have time for slow and patient? What if people find out and force our hand? Then we deal with that honestly when it happens. But we don't create drama preemptively just because we're afraid of what might go wrong. Ava sighed, and Daniel could picture her in that enormous mansion, probably standing by the pool where this entire impossible connection had begun. I hate that you're making sense. I wanted a dramatic solution. I wanted to ride in and fix everything immediately. You can't fix everything with money or power, Ava. Some things require time and trust. I know, but time feels expensive when I've wasted so much of it being alone. You haven't wasted it. You've built something remarkable, and now you're choosing to build something else remarkable. A relationship based on mutual respect instead of convenience or necessity. Another long silence, then Ava's voice came back with something that sounded like hope. So we're doing this? Actually trying. We're trying. Carefully, slowly, with full awareness of the complications. That's terrifying. Good. Terrifying means it matters. Ava laughed, the sound lighter than Daniel had heard in weeks. You keep throwing my own logic back at me. You keep being right about things. They talked for another hour, sketching out what careful relationship building might look like. Coffee dates would continue but gradually expand to other activities, walks in public parks, casual dinners at mid-range restaurants where Ava wouldn't be immediately recognized. Eventually, when the time felt right, Ava would meet Maya in a low-pressure context. They'd let their connection become known organically rather than through announcement or drama. What about your clients? Ava asked. The ones who might judge you for dating someone wealthy. I'll lose some. That's inevitable. But the clients who matter will stick around because they value my work, not my personal life. And my board? Will either accept that you're entitled to a personal life or reveal themselves as the controlling misogynist you've always suspected they are. Daniel smiled in the darkness. Either way, you gain clarity. I love how you make it sound simple. It's not simple, but it's not impossible either. There's a difference. When they finally said goodnight, Daniel felt something settle in his chest. Not relief exactly, but resolution. They were choosing risk over safety, connection over isolation, the possibility of something real over the guarantee of continued loneliness. It wouldn't be easy, but nothing worth having ever was. The following Sunday, Daniel brought Maya to their coffee meeting. He'd prepared her carefully, explaining that his friend Ava was someone special who he wanted her to meet. Maya had asked approximately 7,000 questions, most of which Daniel couldn't fully answer, before deciding that anyone who made her dad smile more was worth meeting. Ava arrived early, and Daniel saw her nervousness in the precise way she'd arranged herself at their usual table. She looked beautiful and terrified, her designer clothes replaced with jeans and a simple blouse that suggested she'd put as much thought into this meeting as Daniel had. "Hi," Ava said as they approached, her eyes moving between Daniel and Maya with visible anxiety. "Hi. Ava, this is Maya. Maya, this is my friend Ava." Maya studied Ava with the frank assessment of childhood. "You're really pretty. Dad said you were nice, but he didn't mention you were pretty." Ava's laugh was surprised and genuine. "Thank you. You're pretty too, and you look just like your dad." "Everyone says that. I think it's the eyebrows." Maya climbed into a chair and accepted the hot chocolate Ava had ordered for her with perfect 7-year-old manners. "Dad says you're important friends. What does that mean?" Daniel and Ava exchanged glances. They discussed how to handle this conversation, had scripted various approaches, but faced with Maya's direct question, scripts felt inadequate. "It means we care about each other," Ava said carefully. "Your dad is someone very special to me, and I hope as you get to know me, we can be friends too." "Are you going to be his girlfriend?" "Maya," Daniel started, but Ava held up a hand. "That's a fair question." She looked at Maya seriously. "I'd like to be, but that's something that will happen slowly, and only if you're comfortable with it. Your dad loves you more than anything, and he'd never do something that made you unhappy." Maya took a sip of her hot chocolate, processing this information with visible concentration. "My friend Emma's mom has a boyfriend, and Emma hates him because he's loud and doesn't listen. Are you loud?"
I can be when I'm excited about something, but I try to be a good listener. Do you like kids? I haven't spent much time around kids, honestly, but I like you so far. That's good because I'm the best kid. Maya grinned. At least that's what Dad says. The afternoon unfolded with surprising ease.
Maya peppered Ava with questions about her work, her house, whether she had any pets, and approximately 50 other topics that jumped around with the logic of childhood curiosity. Ava answered each question honestly, never condescending, admitting when she didn't know something instead of pretending expertise. Daniel watched them interact and felt something unclench in his chest. This was what he'd needed to see, that Ava could exist in his daughter's world, that she didn't need to perform or impress, that she could simply be herself with the most important person in Daniel's life. After Maya excused herself to the bathroom, Ava leaned across the table with wide eyes. She's incredible and terrifying. How do you handle the constant questions? You get used to it. She's always been curious about everything. She's also clearly brilliant and perceptive and watching us very carefully to see if I'm worthy of you. And? Am I passing her evaluation? Ava smiled. I think we're both passing, but the real test is whether I can sustain this over time. One good afternoon doesn't make me parent material. I'm not asking you to be her parent. I'm asking you to be someone positive in her life. Someone who treats her with respect and treats me with respect in front of her. Daniel reached across the table, hesitated, then took Ava's hand. You're doing great. It was the first time they touched beyond brief handshakes, and the contact sent electricity through Daniel's entire body. Ava's fingers tightened around his, and for just a moment, sitting in a crowded coffee shop while his daughter used the bathroom, Daniel let himself believe this might actually work. Maya returned and pretended not to notice their joined hands, though the small smile on her face suggested she'd cataloged the development for later discussion. The weeks that followed established new patterns. Daniel and Ava continued their coffee dates, sometimes with Maya and sometimes alone. They took walks through public parks, visited museums on weekday afternoons when crowds were light, sat on beaches watching Maya play in the surf. Ava learned to navigate Daniel's world, the careful budgeting, the constant time management, the small pleasures that didn't require wealth. And Daniel learned to exist in Ava's world without being consumed by it. He met some of her friends, attended a company event as her guest, sat through a board meeting where he watched Ava dismantle acquisition arguments with surgical precision. He saw her power and brilliance in professional contexts and understood more fully why she'd built such high walls around her personal life. The gossip started as they'd known it would. Trade publications began mentioning Ava's mysterious boyfriend. A few photos appeared on social media. Ava and Daniel at a restaurant, walking through a park, always respectably distant but clearly together. The speculation ranged from curious to cruel, with online comments dissecting everything from their age difference to their economic disparity. They're calling you my midlife crisis, Ava mentioned one evening while they sat on Daniel's apartment balcony after Maya had gone to bed. I've been called worse. Someone posted a comment suggesting I'm exploiting you financially, as if you don't have your own agency or intelligence. She shook her head. The double standard is infuriating. If I were a male CEO with a younger girlfriend, no one would question my judgment. But because I'm a woman with a boyfriend who isn't wealthy, clearly I'm being emotional and irrational. Are you having second thoughts? About us? Never. About whether the world is ready for women to have complicated personal lives without it undermining their professional credibility? Every single day. Daniel took her hand, the gesture now familiar and comfortable. You're handling it with grace. I'm handling it with rage that I'm channeling into work. There's a difference. But she smiled as she said it, though having you to come home to makes the rage more manageable. Come home to. The phrase caught Daniel's attention because Ava had started spending more time at his modest apartment than her mansion. She claimed she found the smaller space comforting, that being surrounded by Daniel and Maya's life felt more real than rattling around 12,000 square feet alone. But Daniel suspected it went deeper, that Ava was learning to value presence over perfection, connection over comfort. 6 months after their coffee shop confession, Daniel's phone rang with a call from an unknown number. He answered to find Marcus, one of Ava's board members, on the line. Mr. Reed, I apologize for calling directly, but I thought you should know that several board members are planning to force a vote regarding Ava's leadership. Daniel felt his stomach drop. Based on what? Ostensibly, concerns about company direction and the refused acquisition. But privately, they're citing her relationship with you as evidence of impaired judgment and emotional instability. That's absurd. I agree, which is why I'm warning you. They're planning to move forward next week, and they have enough votes to be dangerous. Marcus paused. I've worked with Ava for 5 years. She's the best CEO I've ever seen. But she's also in love with you, and that's making her vulnerable in ways she doesn't fully recognize. After the call ended, Daniel sat staring at his phone, fury and fear warring in his chest. He'd known their relationship would generate professional complications for Ava, but he'd convinced himself that her track record and competence would outweigh personal speculation. Now, faced with the reality of board members weaponizing their relationship, Daniel felt the familiar urge to walk away, to protect Ava by removing himself as ammunition against her. But walking away wouldn't solve the deeper problem. It would only confirm the board's sexist assumption that Ava's personal life undermined her professional capacity. When Ava arrived at his apartment that evening, Daniel told her about Marcus's call. He watched emotions flicker across her face: surprise, anger, calculation, and finally, grim determination. They've been waiting for an excuse, Ava said quietly. The acquisition refusal wasn't enough because my reasoning was sound. But add in a romantic relationship with someone they consider beneath my status, and suddenly they have ammunition. I should step back, remove myself as, "Don't you dare finish that sentence." Ava's voice was sharp. This isn't about you, Daniel. This is about whether I'm allowed to be a whole person, someone who runs a successful company and also falls in love. And I refuse to choose between those things to make insecure men more comfortable. But if fighting costs you the company, then I'll build another company. But I won't sacrifice you to preserve power that requires me to be half a person. Daniel pulled Ava close, feeling her trembling with anger and conviction. What do you need from me? Be exactly who you are. Show up when I ask you to. Don't hide or apologize for existing in my life. She pulled back to look at him. I'm going to fight this, Daniel, and I'm going to win. But I need you to believe that loving you doesn't make me weak. I know it doesn't. You're the strongest person I've ever met. Then trust me to handle this my way. The board meeting happened on a Tuesday. Ava had asked Daniel not to attend, wanting to face the challenge on her own terms. He spent the day unable to concentrate on work, checking his phone obsessively for updates that didn't come. Maya noticed his distraction and declared an emergency ice cream dinner to cheer him up, which helped marginally. At 8 p.m., Ava's car pulled up outside Daniel's apartment. He met her at the door, searching her face for clues. She looked exhausted, but triumphant. I won, Ava said simply. Marcus helped me build a counter-coalition. We exposed the acquisition advocates' financial conflicts of interest and their pattern of undermining female leadership. 3 of them resigned rather than face formal investigation. And your relationship with me? I addressed it head on, told them yes, I'm in love with Daniel Reed. Yes, he's a pool technician. Yes, we come from different economic backgrounds. And none of that has anything to do with my capacity to run this company. Ava smiled fiercely. I also pointed out that male CEOs date people from all sorts of backgrounds without board interference. I made it about sexism rather than romance, and suddenly they were on the defensive. Daniel kissed her, pouring 6 months of restrained affection into the contact. When they broke apart, both were breathing hard. You're incredible, Daniel said. I'm angry and tired and so relieved I could cry. Ava leaned against him. But I meant what I said. I won't sacrifice you for corporate approval. Not now, not ever. They stood in Daniel's doorway, wrapped around each other, while Los Angeles hummed with evening energy around them. Inside, Maya was setting up a board game she'd declared they all needed to play. Ava's phone was buzzing with congratulatory messages from supporters, and Daniel felt, for the first time in his adult life, like all the pieces of his world were fitting together instead of pulling apart. Stay tonight, Daniel said quietly. We'll play Maya's board game and eat ice cream for dinner and pretend we're just a normal family for a few hours. I'd like that, though we both know we're anything but normal. Normal is overrated anyway. Later that night, after Maya had gone to bed and Ava had fallen asleep on Daniel's couch, he stood on the balcony looking out at the city lights. He thought about the journey that had brought them here, from pool cleaner and client to friends, to something that transcended easy definition. He thought about all the reasons this shouldn't have worked, all the obstacles they'd navigated through honesty and restraint and choosing each other despite the complications. And he thought about Maya's words from months ago. Sometimes loving someone means being brave enough to choose them even when it's scary. They'd been scared, they were still scared, but they'd chosen each other anyway, and that choice had built something real. Daniel's phone buzzed with a text from Ava, though she was sleeping 20 feet away. "Thank you for being patient with me. For teaching me that strength and vulnerability aren't opposites. For showing me what love looks like when it's real." Daniel smiled and typed back, even though she wouldn't see it until morning. "Thank you for being brave enough to let someone see you. For choosing connection over safety. For teaching me that restraint and commitment aren't the same as giving up." He sent the message and looked out at Los Angeles one more time before heading inside. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. His business to run, Ava's company to manage, Maya's needs to meet. The ongoing navigation of two worlds learning to overlap. But tonight, standing in his modest apartment with the two most important people in his life sleeping peacefully, Daniel felt something he hadn't felt in years. He felt home. The pool at the Sterling estate had been where their story began, with distance and longing and the impossible space between want and wisdom. But the story didn't end there. It evolved, transformed, became something neither of them had imagined when they first acknowledged the connection forming between them. They'd learned that restraint could be its own form of love. That choosing not to take what was offered could be more powerful than taking it. That some connections were worth protecting through careful distance until the distance itself became unbearable, and wisdom meant closing the gap instead of maintaining it. Daniel walked back inside and settled on the couch beside Ava. She stirred slightly, moving closer in her sleep, and he wrapped an arm around her shoulders. This was what they'd built through patience and honesty and refusing to let fear make their choices for them. This was what happened when two lonely people found each other and chose connection over isolation, vulnerability over safety, love over the easier path of walking away. This was the story that proved restraint wasn't weakness and vulnerability wasn't defeat, and sometimes the bravest thing two people could do was admit they needed each other and figure out together what that need could become. Maya appeared in the doorway, rubbing her eyes. "Can't sleep?" "Just thinking," Daniel said quietly. "About happy things?" "Very happy things." Maya patted over and climbed between them on the couch. Ava woke enough to make space, and the three of them settled together in comfortable silence. Outside, Los Angeles continued its endless motion. Inside, three people who'd found each other against impossible odds created their own small sanctuary of connection and peace. And somewhere in the Pacific Palisades, a pool sat still and perfect under the California stars, the place where a single father and a lonely billionaire had first recognized each other's humanity and chosen to honor it through the hardest form of love. Restraint that transformed into commitment, distance that evolved into presence, and fear that became courage through the simple act of showing up for each other again and again until showing up became home.